the guy?
So my first impressions were, let me go back. Before they hired him, I didn't feel one way or another. I think we all knew Fenway really liked him. Like whether you were in the know or not, he just seemed to fit the mold of what Fenway Sports Group wants their executives to be. So I think that there was a natural ability that those two potentially would become connected should he be available. And then we all know how that played out. I didn't really have a feeling one way or the other. Like, I'm not one of those guys that's like, oh, I'm not into analytics. I'm just a hockey guy. Like I'm a whatever wins guy. That's kind of the way that I look at it. And the Kyle Dubas, yes, Toronto didn't break through until this year, but you look at the records. I mean, they were top 5 in the NHL for his entire tenure in Toronto. It's a different roster that he has here. There's no question about that. But I'll say from those 2 press conferences, he's won me over with what he said and what he's sold. But as he said himself last Friday before the awards and the draft tomorrow night, it changes when you don't win. You can have a lot of stuff and a lot of plan and a lot of idea, but when you don't win in this kind of a situation, the whole scope of you and the whole perspective of what you're doing shifts. Now, with that being said, I'm giving him full opportunity to put his stamp on this roster before I have any kind of opinion on what he can do, because he needs to do a lot of work. Let's be real here. Like, I've said this to a few people. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, I'd keep this guy, I'd keep that guy. I'm like, listen, I love these guys. I'm with them all the time. But if you're looking at this from a genuinely just unbiased perspective, this team did not make the playoffs. So how is anybody justified in returning in their current role next year, aside from the ones who we know the obvious and were not the problems last year? You know what I'm talking about. I don't need to name names, but like, I look at this roster and that's how I look at it. Like, I don't think that anybody in particular, aside from the obvious ones, was a reason that they could have gotten into the playoffs. In fact, they maybe were reasons that they did not get into the playoffs. So I think Kyle Dubas has been pretty straightforward in saying he's got $21 million to work with. You could probably shave a couple million off that when he inevitably, in my opinion, qualifies Ryan Poehling and Drew O'Connor. I think that's a no-brainer to bring those 2 guys back. And so then you're working with a little over 19 million, and you got to figure out how to fill your roster. And I think it's really interesting, guys, because he could take a lot of root here. Like, I asked him point blank in our press conference last Friday what characteristic he's looking for in players that he's looking to add this summer. And he used a really peculiar word to me, and he said talent. And like, you think NHL players, like, of course they're talented, but his reasoning was, you look at Sidney Crosby and what Evgeny Malkin and Ricard Raquel and Jason Zucker, like those guys, they had monster years last year. But then beyond that, there wasn't a whole lot of talent and production in the Penguins lineup. So it'll be interesting what that translates to as far as a fairly weak free agent crop, but a pretty heavy trade market, as we've seen. I mean, even just before you and I got on, there's trades happening left and right across the NHL. Yeah. So I'm going to be interested to see what he does. I'd be surprised if over the next week the Penguins roster doesn't have some dramatically new faces on it, because it has to. And it's his job now. It's his roster. He's got to put his stamp on it.